focusing on the minute details, but hidden depth that Rashi is constantly teaching us and pointed out by the Rebbe. So the story here is not a story that seems to be a positive thing, which is a story of Yehudah known as Yehudah and Tamar. And I'm going to outline the basics of the story, but I also want to point out that Yehudah is mentioned in the Medrash as one of the strongest people to ever live. He was a spiritual Superman. It says that when Yehudah was, it says in two Torah portions ahead, that when Yehudah was challenging Yosef, who he thought was the viceroy of Egypt, it says that when Yehudah stomped on the ground in the palace, all of the guards in the palace lost their teeth. He was so strong. In fact, it says that Yehudah alone could have taken on the entire Egyptian army himself. We see a similar character in the Torah that had that type of strength, and that individual was Shimshon, Shimshon, who was one of the judges, the leaders of the Jewish people during their battle with the Philistines, and he was able to rescue the Jewish people during his lifetime. He was super strong spiritually and physically, and he was able to not just rescue the people, but also bring about peace during his time, and even after his lifetime. It took a while for them to have the guts to attack the Jewish people again. So he was very instrumental in providing that safety and peace that was so important. Now, why is this relevant? Because the theme of strength is what we're going to talk about. What is true strength? Strength is obviously a physical thing where you can be strong. You could be physically strong in being able to do things and carry things, and fortitude. You could be mentally strong. You could be spiritually strong. And we're going to talk about the characteristics of the strength and how it relates to failure. So the story about Yehudah here is right after the sale of Yosef, of their brother Yosef, to the Egyptians, or to the Arabs who were traveling to Egypt. And it was after they had to tell their father that Yosef had been killed by a wild animal because they found the special coat that Yaakov had given Yosef. They found it bloodied and torn, and they brought it to their father. It was obviously not true, but they basically told their father that Yosef was killed, and they saw the mourning, that the pain that Yaakov was in. And I guess it impact, even though they did not like Yosef and they perpetrated this against him, but it obviously had seeing their father in pain had an impact on them. And I want to skip to that text quickly, and we'll come back to what I'm skipping here, because this is instrumental to what we want to talk about today. So in the parsha today, or the parsha that we read on Shabbat, it starts by telling us that Yehudah went down from his brothers. That's the verse in the Torah that it tells us. Yehudah went down. Doesn't really explain. So Rashi comes in, and Rashi explains, what does it mean that he went down? It doesn't mean literal down physically, but it means that he was until now he was seen as the king of the brothers. He was the strongest. He was the most had the most leadership qualities and skills. But now Rashi says his brothers demoted him from his high position when they saw their father's distress, even though they were the ones who wanted to kill Yosef, and it was Yehudah who saved Yosef's life by making him by having him sold versus murdered. However, they knew that if Yehudah would have forced them to return Yosef back to their father, they would have listened, because Yehudah was the king. Yehudah was in charge. Yehudah was the boss. So because now they see their father in pain, so they blamed the leader. They blamed Yehudah. You didn't stop us. Yes, you saved Yosef's life, but you could have had us. You didn't. Now we have to lie to our father and say that Yosef was killed. You could have forced us to bring Yosef back to our father. So that is the initial idea of Yehudah's journey here, is that he was being demoted from his position. He was fired from his position as king, as the leader of his brothers, and his brothers were they were serious people. So being the leader of his brothers was a big position. So now back to our topic. So we're gonna skip now further on in the parsha where it tells us that Yehudah went to a place called Timnah, a mysterious place called Timnah. And that's where the verse here in verse 12 and 13, it tells us that Yehudah went after his wife passed away. He went to Timnah, and that's where I guess, where he would graze the sheep. Now, let's talk about Tamar. Who was Tamar? So Yehudah had three sons, um, and Tamar was married to the oldest one, but the oldest one passed away. And then in Jewish law, if a husband passes away without children, so the instead of a divorce, the wife is offered to marry the brother. The wife doesn't have to. The wife could go through a process called chalitza, which is like a divorce, and she's free, and then she's as if she's totally divorced. But you have to make the offer of her marrying the brother, which is what she did. She married the brother. She wanted to have children from Yehudah's descendants, and the brother, whose their names were Er ve'Onan, they both passed away being married to Tamar. So obviously Yehudah was nervous for Tamar to marry his third son, whose name was Shelah. So Yehudah kind of pushed it off. And when Tamar overheard that Yehudah was leaving town and he was going to Timnah, so Tamar decided she's going to intercept him or somehow catch him in order to be with Yehudah. Now, the act over here, I'm going to get a little bit um, specific because I don't want to mince words here. So Tamar, obviously, from her actions, um, wanted to be married to one of the descendants of Yaakov. That's obvious. And she wanted to bear children with Yehudah or with his children. Um, it appears obviously that that's a very low level character trait in a person. Kabbalah teaches us that Tamar was actually a prophetess, and she knew that the descent that Mashiach would descend from her, and she needed to make it happen by being with Yehudah or with his children. The story goes that Tamar disguised herself and and I won't go into the details, but she ended up being with Yehudah. And even though she was still not, didn't go through the chalitza process, she was still not technically a free woman. So she was with Yehudah, and it took Yehudah to admit that he was the father, but she ended up having twins, and one of those twins' name was Peretz, who is known to be the grandfather or the ancestor of Mashiach, the Messiah, and the Redeemer, whoever that is going to be when Mashiach comes. It originates from Peretz because King David originates from Peretz, and we'll go into that in a few minutes. So that's the story of Yehudah and Tamar. Now, Rashi points something out over here, that why does the Torah tell us that Yehudah ascended to Timnah? If just a few verses earlier, even though in our order of the PowerPoint, the verse comes later, but in the Torah, it's actually earlier. The Torah is telling us that Yehudah went down from his brothers. He was demoted from his position. And now the Torah is telling us that Yehudah ascended to Timnah. Why is the Torah saying that? In fact, the Torah says it twice. Let's go back to 1a for a second to the verse. So in verse 12, it says Vayal, that he went up, and that's his journey to Timnah. And in number 13, it said when they were telling Tamar that your father-in-law is going to Timnah, it says Ayla Timnasa, he went up to Timnah. So Rashi wants to know why, or Rashi is assuming that the 5-year-old has a question. Why is the Torah telling us that he had to go up to Timnah? Was Timnah on top of the mountain? Well, Rashi points out, one second. The Torah later in the book of Shoftim, which is not one of the 5 books of Moshe, but it's the book of Nach, the book of Nevi'im. So in the book of Shoftim, when we talk about Shimshon, it says that Shimshon descended to Timnah. So Rashi answers, don't worry, it's not a problem because this city was on a slope. In other words, when you go to the mountain, sometimes you see like these little enclaves of cities, and they're not like on the top of the mountain, but they're like in the middle of the mountain. So Timnah was in the middle of the mountain. So Yehudah was going up to Timnah, but Shimshon was on the top of the mountain. He was going down to Timnah. That's how Rashi makes sense of it. So the Rebbe has a bunch of questions, as usual, on this Rashi. Because number one, and I'm going to go through these very quickly because they're they're technical questions, but as the Rebbe usually does, their technicalities of Rashi are here to teach us a very, very important life lesson. So number one, why does Rashi bring up this question here? We're 5 years old, technically. We haven't learned Shoftim yet. We don't know about Shimshon yet. When we get there, Rashi over there could explain why Shimshon went down to Timnah. Why is Rashi explaining it over here? And number two, why does Rashi wait till verse 13 and not verse 12? Torah mentions it twice. Why does Rashi wait till verse 13? And then also, why does Rashi specify in Shoftim just about Shimshon when he could have just said, why does he have to mention Shimshon? Like he could have just said that it says that he went down to Timnah. Why does he have to mention Shimshon's name? Why is that important? Remember, every word in Rashi is there for a specific reason. So the answer here, and what we're going to learn here, is that Rashi is really teaching us something much more important than just the geography and the sea level height or the height of a mountain or a city. There's something much more important here, because honestly, we don't really need to know those details. When we talk about Abraham going to the Mount Moriah for the binding of Isaac, it just says he arose and he went and he came. He went to the place and he arrived. In other words, even though it was a mountain, the Torah doesn't tell us it was a mountain because it wasn't important to know that it was a mountain, at least for this specific instance. So why is the Torah telling us twice that Yehudah ascended to Timnah? Okay, let's go a little bit further here. This is what we read earlier about Yehudah being demoted from after his brother Yosef was sold. So let's go into I'm not going to get too caught up in this in the concept of a mountain, but there's a lot of text over here that talks about the construction, that when you build something on a mountain, there's a certain level of a different type of foundation that you have to build in order for the mountain for it to be safe. And actually, it's interesting because those of you who follow the news in Western North Carolina, one of the biggest challenges is the destruction was really bad. I mean, in other words, the houses weren't built for that type of destruction, and especially because many houses were built on a slope, or many neighborhoods were built on a slope. The damage was so bad, and it's very hard to rebuild, and very hard to rectify and try to make it like it was before. So there's a lot of discussion here about the construction of a house on a mountain. We're not going to go through this text right over here. So let us talk about the idea. So this is the text that it brings to us about a mountain, that when you have a mountain, there's a beautiful view. There's mountains bring natural beauty to the world. But also when you build on a mountain, you have to build, in a certain way so water doesn't collect in the valley or in the areas that could flood your house. I didn't spend much time preparing this. It's a secular source, but it still tells us the importance of building on a mountain. Now, one thing that comes out of it, though, is that building on top of a mountain is a lot easier, especially in those days, than building on a slope. Because you're on top of a mountain, you're technically it's not flat, but you're technically a lot more stable on top of the mountain. When you're on a slope, you're on a slant, and you're a lot more susceptible to the forces of gravity that would push or pull you down, specifically rain, let's say. When you're on the top of the mountain, the rain's not going to collect in the area, or at least you make sure to choose an area it's not going to collect. So why was Timnah built on a slope? If Rashi is teaching us that Timnah was built on a slope, well, it's a really bad place to put a city, especially in those days. So there's an opinion here, and this entire conversation was discussed in the Talmud, that Timnah was actually two places. That there was a Timnah on top of the mountain, and that's where Yehudah went. And there was another Timnah, which was sort of, I guess, in the valley, just like you have two different areas that have a similar name, but it's north and south or whatever. You can have different locations. So there is a possibility to say that. But let's talk about the difference between mountain climbing and walking. When you climb a mountain, you could do it in two different types of ways. You could walk around the mountain. So like let's say you do a hike in the the Blue Ridge Mountains. So you could do like a hike where it's like a snake path or like you're not driving straight up, obviously, or you're not walking straight up. You're going around the path. So yes, it's on an incline, but it's a lot more spread out, which allows you to take your time and at your own pace be able to climb the mountain. And then there are those who are more risk averse or those who are more adventurous that they climb the mountain, they want to go straight up. So it could be a road that, there's a place here in Western North Carolina I love called Grandfather Mountain. Those of you who've been there, I'm sure you share my passion for it. And the roads, once you get to Grandfather Mountain, the roads are literally like inclined all the way up. So yes, there's roads that go around, but there's roads that go like directly up. It's very scary if you don't have a good car. Um, so you have both of those methods of climbing a mountain, and then you have just a walking on a path that's not even a mountain at all. So let's talk about a journey. When you're going on a journey somewhere, there's three options for this journey. There's going flat on flat land. There's climbing a mountain that is like Snake Path, which is on an incline, but it's still not as it doesn't take as much energy, it does as energy as you're climbing directly up. But then there's the climbing a mountain straight up, even with hooks and climbing literally by hand, climbing a mountain, which is the most difficult form of climbing. What's the difference in extreme between between climbing a mountain versus going for a walk? So when you go for a walk, you obviously have a beginning and an end, but you could also very easily have a middle. You could stop, sit on a bench if there is one. Um, Take a look, take a phone call. I don't know. You could like it doesn't matter because you're going for a walk. So if you're stopping in middle, nothing really changes or nothing happens that is affecting your journey. And as soon as you're done, as soon as you're ready, you continue your journey. If you're walking up a mountain on an incline, you could do the same thing, technically. You'll probably not want to rest for too long, or you not want to stop for too long because it's a harder journey. You're still going up. You're still walking upwards, which is difficult. So it's taking more energy, and the beginning and the end are a lot more relevant. Therefore, you always want to make sure you're making progress towards your ultimate destination, and you want to keep that energy up and keep that um, motivation, excitement you need to get to the top of the mountain. But then when you're climbing a mountain, literally climbing a mountain, rock climbing, you cannot stop without falling. What I mean by that is you could stop obviously because you have to take a breather, but you can't like you're you can't just say, okay, I'm done and take a 2 hour. I mean, you have to keep on climbing or else you could easily fall down or be susceptible to falling down, and therefore you always want to look upwards and climb. Those of you who are professional mountain climbers might be able to explain this a little bit better than I can, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong. But when you're climbing a mountain, it's really a lot more about progress that you're making towards the top versus just a leisurely stroll that you might be having on the ground. Why is this important? Because what Rashi is pointing out over here, the Torah does not have to tell us that Yehudah went up. Why? The Torah mentions twice that Yehudah went up to Timnah. So Rashi is not willing to just assume that, okay, Timnah was on top of the mountain. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. And Rashi is not willing to wait till Shoftim and the story of Shimshon, of Samson, and to tell it, to explain why Shimshon went down and Yehudah went up. Rashi is not willing to wait for that because the idea that the Torah is mentioning this twice, that Yehudah ascended to Timnah, doesn't sit well with Rashi. There's something off base. There's something unusual here. And it's directly related to the fact that Yehudah was demoted just before by his brothers because he did not stop the sale of Yosef, and he did not force his brothers to return Yosef to his father. So Rashi is really trying to bring something out here for the 5-year-old, and Shimshon and Shimshon's name and the story of Shimshon is directly related to Rashi's lesson, and the Rebbe is going to point this out. So the example that Rashi brings explains why the city. Did I skip a text here? 1 second. My bad. No, we didn't skip this. I'm sorry. So the Rebbe explains like this. The example explains why this city was a deviation from the norm and was built on the slope of a mountain. Because Rashi ultimately says it was built on a slope. Because it was between two cities, it made sense that anyone who worked with both, as well as the business dealings between one and the other, which would require the hassle of going up and down, would conveniently meet in the middle, and they wouldn't have to go each time up and down. They were much closer to both cities. So there was a city at the top of the mountain, there was a city on the bottom of the mountain, but living on the slope was a lot easier for those who had to do business in both cities. If the business dealings were common, a permanent place city would have been built. So the Rebbe is explaining logically why it would make sense to put in the extra effort to have a city on the slope. But let's take a look at what mountain climbing and what the idea of a mountain really represents in a spiritual sense. So the David HaMelech writes, and we say this a lot. We say this in Rosh Hashanah, where it says in Tehillim that who will climb Hashem's mountain and who will arise to His holy place. That the idea of reaching God is climbing the mountain. It's compared to climbing a mountain. The idea of living up to God's expectations and doing what we're supposed to do is comparable to mountain climbing. And the Rebbe goes on to say, from the teachings of our sages, it would appear that Moshe never climbed a physical mountain. We're talking about Mount Sinai. In fact, he quotes from the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi says the divine presence never descended below, nor did Moshe ascend to the heavens. I suggest that when the Torah says, well, it's not the Rebbe, this is another commentary. I suggest that when the Torah says Moshe climbed the mountain or ascended to Hashem, it does not refer to an actual climb. The intention is that Moshe received divine permission to ascend to even higher spiritual levels. That the idea of a mountain, just like in the Psalms where it explains who will climb God's mountain, it's referring to the spiritual ascent, the work. Just like with climbing a mountain, there's a toil, there's effort. You have to prepare yourself. You have to have the energy. You have to have the breathing techniques. You have to have the stamina and the ability to reach the top of the mountain. So the spiritual journey is comparable to that, and that's what Moshe was climbing. And that's what it means that who will climb the mountain of God, who will connect with Hashem, it's going to be through effort and through toil. There is no free lunch. There is no anything that comes free is obviously not worth much, and our spiritual growth is likened and compared to mountain climbing. However, there's something very important to say about this in regards to Yehudah. It is known that when climbing and ascending a mountain, we can't stop midway and stand for a time on the slope. If we do, it is almost inevitable that we will stumble and fall downward. So let's assume that the mountain climber here doesn't have all the support they need. Like, let's say, sometimes when you climb mountains, you have like these harnesses that will hold you in place if you stop. But I don't think they had that in the olden days, which means that climbing a mountain, if you stopped, you could fall down a little bit, or you could roll down a little bit, or you could be susceptible to the wind. So therefore, you have to keep on climbing without any pause. So the Rebbe says, climbing Hashem's mountain, in our relationship with God, climbing to connect with Hashem is similar in the sense that one must always be climbing to ensure they don't fall. You can't stop. In other words, you don't have to get to the top. You could be on the ladder, but you have to make sure that you're always moving forward. We must never be content with the spiritual level we have reached thus far. Contentment with our current level and failure to ascend from one sacred level to the next inevitably leads to descent. So this is more relevant and more understandable in life in general, and especially in business life, in relationship life, in everything life, more than mountain climbing, or at least for me. If those of you who are experts at mountain climbing might relate to it, but for me, it's easier to explain the fact that when you're pursuing something, if you're pursuing a relationship, or you're pursuing a business, entrepreneurship, or you're pursuing your spiritual growth, or you're pursuing your physical health and growth, in each of these things, if you stop or take a break, or you can have a bad day, but if you let that linger, then you're going to undo all the hard work that you've put into it so far. You're going to go backwards. There's no such thing as complacency or just stopping, because at that point you're pretty much, instead, if you're not going forward, you're going backwards. We know this with companies, even very, very successful companies. Some of the most successful companies in the world actually have made this mistake where they've reached a point of complacency. They were so good, they were at the top of their game. But that, being at the top or feeling that they're reaching the top, taking a break, led other innovators to overtake them. We all know who those companies are. You could pick out from Polaroid to Kodak to BlackBerry to any of these great companies that became complacent and were overtaken. The same goes in a relationship. If you're trying to build a relationship with someone, whether it's a romantic relationship, whether it's a friendship, if you're not actively pursuing the connection, or even a family relationship, which is just as important, if not more important, where you have to actively pursue and actively engage the relationship to grow it. And if you don't, you're moving backwards. You can't just pause it and then unpause it, whatever you decide. By pausing it, you're going backwards a little bit. In our spiritual growth, in our spiritual connection to Hashem, we're not going to be perfect. We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to get it all right. We're never going to do it. I mean, sorry, never say never. But we may not be doing everything we want to do. We may not be accomplishing everything we want to accomplish. We may not be studying or davening or doing the mitzvahs and doing the things that we want to accomplish. But that's not a problem. The problem is if we stop trying. The problem is if we stop moving forward, we stop adding, we stop growing in our connection. We may decide that we daven once a month, and that we keep Shabbos once a month, or we keep kosher, whatever each individual's journey is. As long as you're constantly growing and adding, you're on the right track. The moment you become complacent and say, "This is me, this is what I do, I don't do anything else," then you're falling down. You're not stopping, you're not pausing, you're falling down. And this is what the Rebbe is saying here, is that we cannot be complacent or content with our spiritual growth, because even though we might fool ourselves that we're just pausing, or this is who I am, this is, I got this far, I'm good, that is when we start falling down. And that's what leads to failure, or even worse, totally undoing all the hard work that we've done. What does this have to do with Yehudah? And more specifically, what does this have to do with Shimshon? So I want to get a little Kabbalistic. I'll leave this on the screen because it's a real, it's a powerful line. But let's talk about Yehudah and Shimshon. Yehudah was at the top of his leadership. He was the leader of his brothers. He was not the oldest, by the way, but he was the leader because he was the most character. He had the highest leadership character. We once had a class talking about the difference between Yehudah and Reuven, and why Yaakov was blessing Yehudah to be the leader, because he knew how to get stuff done, versus Reuven, who was more of a slogan, more of the feeling, more of the giving good speeches, but not necessarily in the results. Yehudah was somebody who brought results. So Yehudah was at the top of his leadership game. I know that's cheapening it just by saying that, but that's the best I could do. So Yehudah's at the top, and he messes up horribly. He could not stop his brothers, or at least he did not stop his brothers from doing one of the worst things you could do, selling their brother into slavery. And they're all seeing their father's pain, and basically, as the leader, it's on him. He failed miserably. And that's why Vayeled Yehudah, he went down, he was demoted, and he also demoted himself. It doesn't say his brothers demoted him. Rashi says that. But the Torah tells us Vayeled Yehudah that he himself also accepted the fact that he's a failure. He came to that conclusion that he's a failure. So what does the Torah tell us? The Torah immediately, within a few verses, tell us that Yehudah Timnah, that Yehudah was ascending. Don't make the mistake that Yerida, that downfall was anything more than a temporary blip, because he immediately picked himself back up and climbed the mountain. And that's why the Torah repeats it and wants us to have it etched in our brains. It's not settling just to tell us that he went to Timnah or climbed it twice. Just because we had Vayeled Yehudah, we had Yehudah descended a few verses ago, that was temporary. Yes, it happened. We have to acknowledge that it happened, but it was temporary, because now Yehudah is on the ascent. He's fighting his way back up the mountain. He fell, absolutely, no denying it, but now he's climbing up the mountain. So now, why does Rashi bring Shimshon? Shimshon, who was the savior of the Jewish people, it says that he went down to Timnah. Now, I don't want to get too much into the story, but this is where he went down to Timnah and he married a Philistine girl. And Kabbalah explains that what Shimshon was doing, because his job, he was born in holiness. His job was to save the Jewish people. So I'm going to be very brief on this, because it's a very deep concept, one that I myself don't fully understand, but I'm going to give the little that I do and try to make it make sense. So Shimshon's job was to save the Jewish people. Now, he could do that by waiting for the Philistines to attack and then defend them and then fight back. Or he could go to the source and try to undo the fact that they're an enemy in the first place. What is the source of the Philistines' hatred of the Jewish people? It goes back to Esav. And from Esav, it goes back all the way to Cain, to Adam's first son, Cain, who killed his brother Havel. Esav was almost a reincarnation of that type of hatred, which led to Amalek and the hatred of the Jewish people. And all bad things that happen originate from this negativity that was allowed into the world through those actions, through Cain's action of killing his brother, through Esav's actions of being a murderer. All that led to this negativity being into the world. And Shimshon understood this. And he figured, if I could undo that, just like Yitzchak wanted to give the blessings to Esav to try to transform him and try to elevate him, to undo the damage so that that way the negativity that's going to follow wouldn't happen, wouldn't materialize. And Shimshon had the same idea in mind. If I could go down to the Philistines, and if I could try and elevate, and I could try to rectify the damage that was done because of the power that God gave me by being born as a Nazir. Remember, he was a miracle birth, and he was miraculously super strong, not just physically, spiritually, mentally, everything else. So if I could utilize that to transform and elevate and fix what was the wrong in the first place, then there will be no more war. There'll be no reason for a war. There'll be no challenges. It's not diplomacy, by the way. It's not diplomacy or compromising. That just basically means that you're compromising on who you are. What this is going back to the origin of why there's a division in the first place and undoing that division so it's all unity and one, and we're all one, and godliness is recognized within each person. And if that happens, then there's no division between people. So Shimshon was trying to go to the source of the negativity and trying to elevate it and trying to change it. That's as far as as much as I could explain. But what happened? Unfortunately, he wasn't able to, which is why it's a yerida. It was a fall for him, which ultimately, eventually, had to just lead to war anyways, which Shimshon won. But it was a fall for him because he went beyond what his abilities were, and he wasn't able to accomplish his goal. Putting that aside, now he still won the war. He still won the battle. He still accomplished what he was meant to accomplish. In fact, one of the most famous songs that the Israeli army, the Israeli soldiers like to sing is his Shimshon's last words, "Zachreni na, remember me and strengthen me this one last time, so I could secure the Jewish people." So he accomplished what he needed to accomplish. He did what he had to do, but his initial approach, his initial thought process didn't work out the way he wanted it to work. So Rashi is bringing up Shimshon to tell us that unlike Shimshon, where his fall was a little bit more permanent, a little bit more challenging to overcome, Yehudah immediately turned around and ascended to a higher level, to the point that it was Yehudah and Timnah, and it was in a permanent way. And not just in a permanent way, but we're going to see the results of Yehudah not giving up, and Yehudah not letting the failure, not letting the fact that he failed have a permanent impact on him. To the contrary, it had the most amazing possible impact it could have, which we'll see in a second. This is implied by Rashi's words. He wrote that the reason the phrase ascent and descent apply to Timnah is because it's standing on the slope of a mountain. What does the slope represent? The slope is spiritual improvement, which prevents one from standing still, and which means the idea of Timnah is that it doesn't allow you to just take a break. It forces you to keep climbing. The idea of being on a slope means that you have to keep climbing or else you'll fall down. Moreover, even ordinary walking is not possible. One can only climb either up or down. There's no middle path. There's a zero-sum game. You're either going up or you're going down. And that's what Timnah represents. And that's where Yehudah went to. Yehudah went to the place where there's only one possibility, which is going up. At least for Yehudah, that was the only possibility. And this is the message for us, which we're going to get to in a second as far as what the results were. The message for us is it's not just that you shouldn't give up after failure and that you're going to keep climbing. And the failure itself, the falling down, is what allows you to go to Timnah, is what allows you to go to the slope, which will propel you to even greater heights. What are the greater heights that we're talking about? So in the story of Tamar, what happened? After they were together, and after Yehudah admitted that he was the one, because Tamar was arrested because she became pregnant, and she was still technically engaged to Shelah. But after Yehudah admitted that he was the one that got her pregnant, so they had twins. Tamar had twins. And what does Tamar say? Let's take a look at text 11. I'll go back to that text that we skipped in a second. What does Tamar say? Ma paratzta alecha peretz. Because there were twins, it was Peretz and Zerach. And it says that Peretz was supposed to come out second. But Peretz jumped in front to come out first. So Tamar is saying to his son, why did you breach the breach? Ma paratzta alecha peretz. And the Medrash tells us that because Peretz represents that this child would be the greatest of all breachers. Peretz means to expand, to break the boundaries. He would be the one to usher in the possibility of Mashiach, of the Messiah, of whom it is written, the breacher arose before them. So Peretz, it wasn't just that Peretz became the ancestor of Mashiach, because from Peretz comes King David, and from King David comes King Solomon. These are all the ancestors of Mashiach. What's about Peretz? The idea of Peretz is that he ushered in the possibility for Mashiach to be born. He brought in the concept. He brought down the energy that made it a possibility for Mashiach to be conceived and born, and for the world to be ready to handle the revelation that will come with Mashiach. How is this possible? Because of Yehudah's ascent, because of Yehudah going to Timnah, because of Yehudah reaching a point that even though he was on the bottom, even though he was, totally broken, totally a failure, but he went to Timnah where it forces you to keep climbing. That energy, that extra effort, that extra push is what brought down the energy of Mashiach, which will ultimately redeem us and bring about the ultimate peace and the ultimate perfection of the world. And this is what Rashi wants us to know when he says Oila Timnasa twice in the Torah. Rashi waits till the second time because Rashi wants it to be reinforced that it was an ascent. It was not a descent. And it was a sitting on a slope where Yehudah was kept climbing. It wasn't that he reached the top of the mountain. That means he would be finished. He's not done. He went to the point where he's constantly climbing and elevating, even though he had such a tremendous failure. And this is the ultimate strength. The ultimate strength of a person is not that you don't fail. Everyone fails. Every successful person has many, many more failures. Every piece of happiness has a lot of pain that comes before it. So it's not about the fact that we avoid pain or avoid failure or avoid challenges. It's that we utilize them to energize us, to push us to Timnah, where we force ourselves to keep climbing and we don't let ourselves to come down. And when we do that, we draw in the extra piece of energy which comes to the essence of our soul that allows us to bring about, like what Yehudah brought about, which is the coming of Mashiach. So this is Rashi's main point. And this is why just that mention of ascending to Timnah is so important, contrary to when there could be a descent, is that there's only one option, is to go up. And that's what Yehudah represents, and that's what the idea of Yehudah's strength represents, which leads to the birth of Peretz, which will eventually lead to the coming of Mashiach. So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I want to wish you all a happy early Hanukkah, and we should bring the light and the happiness and the joy with the coming of Mashiach, hopefully before Hanukkah even arrives. Let's hope it happens immediately.